Well, this afternoon I am staying over to do a couple of more interviews this afternoon, and one is with Mr. Chris Byrd. Through a mutual friend, we have just met one another. He has been working at the Capitol on some bills. I'll let you give the bill numbers and kind of introduce the audience to what you've been working on.
Well, thank you, Kat. The House bill is 562, and the Senate version of that, which is authored by Senator Donna Campbell, who's my senator, is 531. So that's Senate Bill 531, which is incidentally scheduled for hearing tomorrow morning.
I believe you're going to be over there.
On the Senate floor, that's correct.
Yeah.
I'm also working with Molly White, Representative Molly White, on her measure, which is a disclosure bill.
All right, let's kind of go into what the bills are, what they encapsulate, the impact it'll have in changing current situation.
Well, 531, Senate Bill 531 and House Bill 562, they mirror each other, so they're one and the same. Incidentally, 562 has come out of the Judiciary Committee. It was voted out, interestingly, 7-2, which means it picked up 2 Democrat votes. And I actually spoke with one of those representatives about her vote on that. If you can remember to ask me about that, we'll get into that.
Okay.
But, both of those being the same, they speak to a need that we're seeing across the country, where in a conflict of laws kind of scenario, where our judges are asked to either apply foreign law or enforce foreign law, and it's predominantly in a family law type of setting. The question is well, judge, what's the direction that you have to proceed? And so these bills are designed to answer that question, to say, Judge, no one's making the application or the enforcement of foreign law prohibited.
Now, when you say foreign law, you're referring to perhaps Sharia law?
Actually, no.
All right.
We are finding Sharia to be certainly one of the originating sources, if you will, but the bill defines it as the law of a jurisdiction outside the territory of the United States. So
that would apply to everything else.
It would apply to civil code of a jurisdiction outside the United States. So it's a fine distinction that's very important, because it is speaking to, Judge, how do you interpret, apply, or enforce the jurisdictional law of another land, not their religious law, because we see now cases come into our American judicial scene that have absolutely nothing to do with religion. We've got some cases where U.S. courts have drawn inspiration from the Convention on the Rights of the Child. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's called, amongst circles that are familiar with it, CRC, Convention on the Rights of the Child. Well, that's a UN treaty. It's a UN treaty that's been signed on by 192 nations, but not the United States and not Somalia. That's a strange link.
Really?
I don't understand that, but it's not U.S. law because it's not U.S. treaty. And as such, by definition, since it is treaty of 192 nations, it would be the law of that jurisdiction. And I cite that as an example.
Okay.
So if we find in our American judicial scene a judge drawing inspiration from the CRC, then that would be an example of applying or enforcing foreign law. And of course the bill goes on to say, Judge, you may not do that unless it guarantees basic fundamental constitutional rights. And in our case, in the Texas bill, it goes on to add the Constitution of the state of Texas as well.
Very good.
And I'm very glad to see that, because one of those fundamental rights to Texans which is not exclusively unique to Texas, but it is one of the things that Texas is known for amongst American jurisprudence, is the right to trial by jury on both criminal and civil matters. So we don't limit the application of that, and it's a huge expense to the taxpayers, but it is a fundamental right that Texans take very, very seriously. So we see cases where CRC inspiration is drawn from to make law. That would be an example. We've got other cases where just other jurisdictions have bad law. That is the law of the land. Egypt, for example, has an irrebuttable presumption in the family law setting that a young boy, best interest is defined to be in the sole custody of mother until he's 10 years old.
Wow.
Well, that's not religious. Egypt has not adopted any religious law, and yet that could not be reconciled in any way with basic fundamental rights of the United States or Texas. Does that help you there? Okay.
So with the bills that you're looking at, you were saying it will, earlier when we were talking beforehand, you were saying that they would have to outline in it the particular constitutional rights that potentially, how am I trying to say this?
They have to outline the rights that are violated?
That's it, thank you, that's the word I can, yes.
Well, no, the bill doesn't require that a judge do that.
Okay.
The bill requires that the judge, in one of these conflict of laws kind of scenarios, that the judge keeps mindful.
Oh, gotcha.
The judge
Yes.
keeps mindful that there are basic fundamental constitutional rights that you still have to make certain or guaranteed before you go to apply foreign law or enforce foreign law. I'll give you a current example. It just came out 2 days ago. I think it was April the 28th. The appellate record was released of a brand new case out of Houston.
Okay.
And in that case, you had a couple that was married in Pakistan. I believe that was in '09. And I just read it briefly yesterday. The husband comes back to Houston and waits for 6 months for his wife to join him after he receives a visa. So she comes to Houston and they remain as a married couple in Houston. But they're not happily married. And so not too long later they begin to get into a divorce situation. And while that's brewing, he says to her, let's go back and visit our families to Pakistan.
Okay, I'm going to pause while we have this background noise.
So to continue, she comes back, or comes here for the first time once her visa is approved, and they live together as man and wife in Houston, but they're not happy. They get into troubles with their marriage, and that's going to lead to a divorce. And they're both from Pakistan, but they're here, legally here, as residents of Texas. And so he suggests to her, well, let's go back and talk to our families. And so they do. They go back to visit. Well, while they're there visiting, and she's over at her parents' house, he declares a talaq divorce. Talaq, T-A-L-A-Q. A talaq divorce is unique and is accepted in the Pakistani civil code. I'm not going to have the name for you, but it is the law of the land.
Okay.
It is their civil code. Now, did they derive that from Sharia? Of course they did. But it does have some distinctions. But nonetheless, a talaq divorce is legal in Pakistan. And so he, on his own, without her being present, he simply declares that she's divorced 3 times, and he sends her a notification to her parents' house that she's now divorced. And so then he sends over a notice to a union council, which has been set up under their civil code, to give her the opportunity to attempt a reconciliation. And if it's not done in 90 days, everything's final and she's done.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they're over there visiting.
Wow.
Their home is in Houston. Now, here in Texas, if you apply the Texas family law to that, you've got to be a resident for a period of time before you could attempt to do such a thing. And of course, a italic divorce is only available to the man. It's not available
Right.
in reciprocation to the women. Now, there's been plenty of times my wife might want to say, you're done 3 times, and it might be a good thing, I don't know, but it certainly smacks of gross gender inequality, and that's the problem. And it's gender inequality in the merits of that, but look at the notice, and look at the fact that their home is in Houston, Texas, and there are so many things that are derived from the cause of the dissolution of the marriage that speak to spousal maintenance, or it might speak to an unequal division of property,
Yes.
and so forth. But see, all that's washed away with the italic divorce, and she's just over there visiting. She doesn't. Neither one of them have a residency requirement that would be asked for here in Texas. She's over there visiting, and then figures out she's divorced. Comes back here and says, you know what, that really wasn't a divorce. I'm a Texas resident. I'm going to go seek that relief from the Texas District Court.
Mm-hmm.
And she files for divorce. And he denies it because her husband, ex-husband, depending on which way you look at it, comes in with this certificate of italic divorce, and the Houston judge gives that full faith and credit.
Wow.
Under a principle called comity, that's giving the weight to the foreign judgment. But you see, House Bill 562 and Senate Bill 531 would say, Judge, you can't deny jurisdiction if you believe there's a foreign court that's got also jurisdiction, if you believe that the foreign court's going to apply foreign law, and that foreign law would violate basic fundamental constitutional rights. In addition, Judge, you cannot enforce a foreign judgment, which is what he did.
Yeah.
And so what does he do with his opportunity to make things right, the judge? He says, well, ma'am, you're divorced, so I'm going to take your petition as a post-petition for division of assets, because I see here in the italic, the Pakistan Union Council did not divide any assets. You all live here, your home's here, and so let's do that. So he divides the asset, and she says, you know, Judge, you got it wrong. So she appeals to the appellate court in Houston, and they affirmed. And this just came out 2 days ago, or 3 days ago. And it's a horrible decision, but it's not unlike many that we see all over the land.
Wow.
And so these bills are designed to give these judges some tools, some directions in these strange conflict of law. Who would think you go home to visit your parents because you're there, you're divorced? And then that's enforced in Texas. It's ridiculous, especially when you consider that, well, that can
Could be a
only be
motive.
done by the man.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's total gender inequality. Anyway,
Right.
sorry.
Well, no, that's good. That's important information that we need to understand. What are some of the other? We're aware of the Sharia court up in the Metroplex that's been going on. How are you seeing that impacting? I mean, once again, it's 2 different sets of laws trying to operate within the same area.
Right. Well, we are seeing, regrettably, the emergence of some of these tribunals. And I know that the city of Irving's mayor has taken a strong stand. What you actually heard when the headlines were wrong, the media was not correct when they tried to sell the news as to what happened in council. What the mayor there of Irving and the council voted on, I think it was 5-4. It's remarkable that the vote was that close.
Yes.
Was to simply make it a resolution of the city council to support House Bill 562 and Senate Bill 531. That was the resolution. But the media sold it as, well, Irving has outlawed Sharia. Well, no, that's not what it was.
Yeah.
And furthermore, Sharia is nowhere mentioned in 562 or any other reference to any other religion. And it would apply to CRC cases. It would apply to wrongly dealt out decisions of the Hague Convention. It would apply to the Egypt case that's in Texas that's happened, the YMA case. We've got cases all over that deal with jurisdictions where we see mainly the biggest problem is gender equality worldwide. Well, gender equality is not necessarily sourced from religion. It just happens to be the culture. And there are many nations that are on watch lists for raising that awareness and making improvement. Well, if we stumble into a foreign order and we're asking Texas to enforce it, this gives that judge some standards, some minimum standards to keep mindful before that judge proceeds in applying or enforcing foreign law. I see that to be pretty reasonable to say, Judge, we're not telling you, we're still giving you the discretion to apply or enforce foreign law. We're simply saying, please be mindful. Every resident of Texas has basic fundamental constitutional rights. The rights to equal protection, due process, notice, the weight of evidence and the sufficiency of evidence, opportunity to be heard, and so forth. You know, it's a lengthy list. Right to a jury trial is another one, before you proceed and apply or enforce a foreign law. I think that's pretty reasonable. It's what all Texans would expect. Many people come for all different reasons to Texas. And it's a great state, and we have great laws, and these measures are designed to really protect our laws.
Protect Texans.
Protect Texans. One of the obvious results of the passage of these bills would be to ensure that women's rights are not violated and the rights of children. You asked me about the tribunal up in Irving. Did you know that we had a Texas Islamic court that dates back to around 1950? Were you aware of that?
I've just recently become aware of it.
Well, that's a different court than the one in Irving.
Okay.
This is a court in Richardson, Texas.
All right.
It's been in operation since around 1950.
Wow.
And we have a case that came out in 2003 where a woman was in, her name was Rola Cadora. She was in a normal divorce situation before Judge Frank Sullivan III. And he had already issued some interlocutory orders, some temporary orders, and applying the Texas Family Code. And all of a sudden the parties leave, and the community has a discussion where these folks are from. The community that they live in had a big community discussion. And out of that comes this agreement where that bears her signature that says, okay, I'm going to agree to stay these proceedings before Judge Sullivan, where Texas Family Code's being applied, Texas law's being applied, and we're going to lift those issues which are justiciable in before this court. The judge has jurisdiction over these issues. Best interest of the children, equitable division of property, dissolution of marriage, and so forth. All these issues are squarely before the judge for good, solid reasons. But we're going to lift these out in front of the judge, and we're going to stick them in front of the Texas Islamic Court. And the agreement went on to say that will apply Islamic law. So they go to an arbitration, and of course, what happens to her is what we might have expected. She becomes the obligor, she loses custody of her children. I can't speak to the division of property, but there's huge gender inequalities under that system of laws. She comes back and asks for that to be reconciled, to be fixed, asked Judge Sullivan to fix it. He noted that they couldn't even agree on the scope of the issues that the agreement was meant to cover. So he retried it and squared things up, and then the man appeals it to the Fort Worth Court of Appeals. They reversed Judge Sullivan. Now, Judge Sullivan told me about 3 weeks ago that was a very regrettable decision. He had stronger words than that for it, and said, Chris, if it had been appealed to the Supreme Court, I'm sure it would have been reversed. But this highlights the problem. These women that find themselves in these situations, they don't have the time, the resources, the capacity, the energy, the safety to reach out and seek refuge and seek relief from our judicial system, and many of them do it at the risk of life. Well, she didn't have any more capacity to keep that moving to the Supreme Court so we could actually get to the bottom of one of these types of cases. And so there it says, it lingers since 2003.
Wow. I think that's one of the things that the typical woman does not understand is the difference in the rights between what the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and all provide for us here versus the Sharia law or other parts of the world. And it's interesting talking to a lot of the people that have come from there, expressing how we take all of this for granted. We don't understand. But women seem to be have the most to lose if our society continues to change and begin accepting more and more of the other types of laws.
That's true. Before I leave the Jabri case, I meant to mention, and when I'm talking to Judge Sullivan about that, he said, Chris, do you realize that holding actually could stand for the argument that it is permissible for a person to sign a contract and waive their constitutional rights, not only for themselves, but for their children? He said, Chris, remember now, what was in front of me was the best interest of the children. There was no best interest standard applied before that court. And I'm not going to be the one that's going to deviate from the Constitution and our laws. And look at what happened to the best interest of the children. I mean, that contract did away with that as well. I'm not going to enforce such a thing. He was very adamant about it, and good for him. But apart from that, to move on to your comment, yes, it is foreign to us to think of so many people not being aware of our laws and our judicial protections that we have, and our equal protection and due process that our laws have refined for so long. We're unaware. And so that is what Representative Molly White's bill is attempting to do. It is to say, when you get into one of these mediations, we're going to ask that you disclose that our courts exist, our Bill of Rights exists, what our fundamental rights are, so that you know you don't have to proceed along this way. You can actually go back to our courts and seek your redress.
What other type things do you see that we need to address that are being challenged today with some of the things that are going on?
That's a broad one. In what way?
It's broad, so you can go whatever direction with it.
Well,
but with a lot of the different people that you have been visiting with and talking with, there's been a lot of issues that are coming to light.
The things that we're doing today, we're talking about something that matters. First of all, our society in general is not typically talking about things that matter, but we have our freedoms.
Yes.
We may do with our time as we wish, within certain guidelines. But we need, I think, to refine our conversation a little bit to things that matter, and particularly this issue. This issue matters because this issue is a complete assault to our entire way of life, and it's that way on purpose.
Yeah.
And so our laws need protected, our courts need protected, our judges need to be made aware, we need to be made aware, and so do those that come to our state seeking refuge and safe haven or for whatever reason, who are not aware of our unique system of laws that are based on fairness, and they're based on goodness, and they're based on, you wouldn't have something done to you or to someone else that you wouldn't have done to you in the same process. That, that sense of fairness is fundamental to our judicial system. It's not perfect, but we need to take some steps, I think, to let these folks that come into our state and across the country know about these avenues of fairness that we have available. They're unaware. Right now, regrettably, to get your citizenship or your residency, I think it is, you only have to pass 6 questions out of 100. Well, you're going to laugh at this, but we have a Texas ID. Why not use that process to have a Texas passport? And in order to get one, you're going to have to pass a civics class, and you're going to have to know about some things, namely what to do, our laws, and where to go, and your rights. It's very important to know your rights.
Do you see any parallel with what's going on today with what was happening in Iran back in the 60s and 70s, when they were a very westernized country, and then now they've done the 180?
Well, and what happened there, I think, generally is what planted the seeds for the uprising in Egypt. We had a corrupt, arguably a corrupt, civil, secular-based kind of system in place in both places, but they were not dealing out laws and justice fairly. And so that oppression gave seed to the Muslim Brotherhood that came in both places. But interesting enough, look at what happened with Morsi in Egypt. And that, in fact, the Muslim Brotherhood is the home in 1928 in Egypt. Did you know that? 1928 is when the Muslim Brotherhood was started in Egypt. So all of a sudden, because of corrupt exercise of civil secular government, which is a consequence of man being a bad actor in the exercise of government, it created the atmosphere for change. That change comes along, and now all of a sudden we have the entire Muslim Brotherhood come along, and they take over the government. And how long did that last? Egypt is 94% Muslim. How long did that last? 12 months before they were thrown out on their ear because of the oppression. And so, I have a personal saying, truth will float to the top, or in time, all things come to light. Yes. Well, it's remarkable that it didn't take that much time for all things to come to light in Egypt. I think we saw that unfold to your question back in Iran, and of course now look where we are with Iran. I mean, it's a horrible situation.
What would you want my audience to do in regards to your bill? Should they be calling their representatives and senators or senator?
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. One of the things that we see in the dialogue of why should the bill not be passed and so forth is, well, this is really an anti-Sharia measure, isn't it, Chris? Well, no, it's really not. I mean, I've given you some other examples. Yes. And it's been drafted that way for a reason. Clearly, one wouldn't be able to target a particular religion and try to make that legal. But at the same time, we need to, I think, basically say in our messaging, these bills protect that basic fundamental rights will always be observed and applied to all, because all deserve those rights. And if we don't, regrettably, we are seeing more of the victims being the rights of women and children. And so I would certainly encourage the messaging to our Texas senators and our representatives to please give favorable consideration to how these bills, 562 and 531 respectively, for the purpose of giving our judges some additional guidance, direction, when they're faced with conflict of laws to preserve basic fundamental constitutional rights. And then I'd also throw in Molly's bill, 3698. We need the messaging there, and that's a disclosure bill that gives parties to these non-binding mediations that we're starting to see
Okay.
the opportunity to have disclosed to them their rights. Now, in hearings, I'm challenged to say, well, Chris, that's a violation of constitutional rights. My response to that is this: how is it possible to violate somebody's constitutional rights by simply informing them that they have them?
Exactly.
It sounds strange to me, but that's the dialogue that we now see at the Capitol amongst some of our lawmakers when it comes to Representative White's bill.
So what time tomorrow will you be testifying?
There's several measures before the Senate committee. The other one is the pasture protection bill. I know you're aware of that. They've both been called, along amongst others, with the 9 o'clock call time. It's on the floor with the Senate, and you know, the committee picks their own order, or the chairman.
That's true.
And that's Senator Huffman. I have no idea what the scheme there is. We did not even have a hearing be offered until Thursday. All this time, she was denying that this measure and some others would even be given a hearing, even though, as I told you, the House committee on this passed the measure 7-2. And I spoke with Representative Symphonian Thompson out of Houston, who voted for it out of committee. And I asked her why she did. And she said, Judge, this is a women's rights issue.
It is, in lots of ways.
And I see it that way. It's the rights of women and children, and I support it. So we need the messaging.
All right, very good. Chris, I appreciate your time today, and please keep us updated as the bills move forward and hopefully end up becoming law.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for the time for letting us talk about this, because it is important.
Thank you.
You're welcome.